All right, Christopher and Tim, if you guys are ready, do you wanna get us underway here tonight? Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Chris.
We're delighted to have Tim Shaw with us again for what have been some wonderful cooking demonstrations. Today, Tim is going to be dealing with pasta making and as well as making some basic pasta sauces. Tim he's made some pasta doughs already, but he's going to walk through that and also focus a lot on cutting the pasta, making the pasta, etc. And at the same time, he's going to be, I should give you a friendly reminder. If you're seeing the closed caption down there, just hit the CC at the bottom if you want to have the closed caption go away. And then make some basic sauces. And finally, if you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat, and Tim will get to those at the end or throughout the program. So with that, I will turn it over to Tim.
All right, thank you very much. I was just talking with Chris and Rob about this, that this actually is totally a viewer request. The last time we did, I don't remember what it was we did. Was that over Valentine's Day? Was that the last time we did one for Williams? The purple and yellow tagine we did. We were talking with people afterwards, and several people said they'd love to see how to make some pasta. It's not an ideal situation to do it over a Zoom because pasta, with like a lot of baking and a lot of pastry work, is it's very tactile, but it is it's easy enough, and it does work in conjunction with sort of the videos that we will show you and the handout that I wrote up about making pasta. So it's actually a fun thing to teach as a teacher because it really stresses technique over recipe. There's a YouTube channel called Pasta Grannies. If anybody ever has a chance to watch it, you watch these Italian nonnas who are 95, 100 years old, who are making pasta by hand, and they make shapes. Maybe they're like one of only 2 people left in the world making a particular shape in a particular region. And it really shows how it's not about memorizing a recipe or exactly following a ratio, because every time you make pasta dough, you're working with different ingredients, and it's the flour that you use is going to be, if you're making pasta in the middle of New York City in the middle of August, where it's humid and everything is moist, you're probably going to need to add less liquid, either as eggs or as water, than you would if you were making pasta in the middle of Santa Fe in September, where I just was last week with 2 weeks ago with Sarah. It's very, very dry. So it's a great learning pasta is a great way to focus on technique rather than recipe, because every time you do it, it's going to be slightly different. It's also very, very easy. It's a great technique to learn as well when you're learning some basic cooking stuff, because it's not that it's foolproof, but it is kind of foolproof. However it turns out, there are things you can do with it. Even if it doesn't look the way you wanted it to, or it doesn't feel the way you wanted it to, you can cut it into little shapes and boil it, and it's probably going to be completely delicious with a sauce. And if it does get totally messed up, it's just flour and water. It's really, really inexpensive. So it's good to practice some techniques with such inexpensive ingredients, rather than trying a technique with lobster or filet mignon, where if you mess it up, you've just wasted a couple $100. So I thought it would be great when enough people showed interest in it in the last demo we did, that we finally got our stuff together and are going to do it. I wanted to make this, since we only do have an hour, I wanted to make this more about the technique of rolling the pasta, rolling the shapes by hand, to show that you don't need special equipment. I have a lot of equipment, mainly because it's a business expense, so it's a tax write-off for me. But you know, people were making pasta for thousands of years before there were, you know, $150 KitchenAid attachments and all this stuff. So learning how to do it by hand really gives you a great feel for what it is that you're doing. If we have time and if people are interested, I do have my KitchenAid set up. So I can show you how to roll it through there. But my goal is to really just show the technique of making the doughs and then showing a couple really basic shapes and how easy it is. I did make the tomato sauce. It's a basic marinara, and the recipe is included in the little packet that you gave. And the tomato sauce, again, is another thing that you should never really have to memorize or even utilize a recipe for a tomato sauce. If you Google, you know, tomato sauce, Italian tomato sauce, you're going to get 10 million different recipes. They're all probably really, really great. The idea of using a recipe this basic is, again, to give people the confidence to know that when you're cooking for yourself. So following someone else's recipe isn't necessarily going to give you what it is that you want. A lot of people don't realize when you're cooking for yourself, you have agency to cook for yourself. So if you're cooking Ina Garten's sauce, which is probably not her sauce, she probably, you know, got it from somewhere else. It's written to her taste and her palate and her level of garlic and salt and seasoning and heat and everything. So learning the basic techniques of something like a sauce like that is, again, a great way to learn your own palate and learn what it is that you like when you're cooking for yourself or cooking for your family. And then the other two sauces that are included, just because, again, they're very basic and super, super easy. Well, one is super easy, are an American Alfredo sauce, which is like what you'd get if you bought canned Alfredo sauce or went to Olive Garden or something. It's, you basically heat up cream with some garlic and then put in some cheese in your pasta and you're done, which is very, very different from sort of the original. And I say original because no one's 100% sure who was the first person to make Alfredo sauce. It's a much simpler sauce, the way that it is made in Rome or in Italy, if you even see it, because it's not as common in Italian restaurants as it is in American restaurants, which is basically just going to be melting some butter with a little bit of the pasta cooking water for the starch, and then adding in some really good Parmesan, and that's it. It's so much lighter. It's so much, I don't necessarily say more flavorful, because American fettuccine is quite flavorful because it's cream and garlic, but it's a lot more subtle and it's a lot lighter, and it highlights kind of the quality of the noodle more than just the thickness of the cream and the garlic. So I'm not going to, I will demo making the Italian fettuccine variation, because this is my dinner and that's the one I kind of want to eat. But we'll give you I have a video on my YouTube video of how to make the American Alfredo sauce. That a nice little Williams tie-in is when I was shooting that. A friend from our year, 1989, Linda Burke, was here, and she was my cameraman as I was shooting the fettuccine, the American fettuccine Alfredo, and then we ate it, and it was delicious. But this is the Italian one is a little trickier because it's literally only 2 ingredients, and if it's too hot or if it's too cold, or if you use kind of a pre-shredded cheese or something, the cheese can kind of clump up and you don't get a beautiful smooth sauce. So like a lot of things in cooking, sometimes the hardest things to do are the easiest things, because there's only 3 ingredients, and if it doesn't come out perfectly, it's still going to taste good, but there's a trick to getting it right. And having said that, hopefully I will get it right while I'm doing the demo. So I don't think I need to introduce myself. I think most people here have been on one of these, but I graduated in '89. I had no idea I wanted to become a chef. I started cooking at Williams in the orchards and the mill on the Floss over the summers. I stayed over the summers in the late '80s and just fell in love with the restaurant world. I loved everything about working nights and eating food and experiencing all this food that I'd never eaten before. I knew nothing about food when I started working at the orchards. A fun story is the first brunch I worked, the chef had pretty bad handwriting, and he wrote, actually it was a she that day, she wrote up the special omelet of the day. And I went to the first table, who was a Williams College professor, and I said, the omelet of the day is a shit cake mushroom. And they were like, I think you need to go reread that. So when I started, I knew nothing about food, but I really fell in love with the food industry. I fell in love with cooking. And when I moved to New York, I just started doing it. I went to the French Culinary Institute. I've worked in restaurants, catering. I worked for Martha Stewart. I was a private chef for years. But now I've been teaching for 15 years and really, really love the teaching aspect. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when I'm teaching, I really try to teach to technique, to show people, to get people comfortable and confident when they're cooking, rather than just saying, you know, cook this because I'm telling you to. I approach it much more. I approach even my teaching with much more of a curiosity, rather than sort of, I don't know, I guess an ego and saying, you know, do this because, you know, this is the best way you're going to do it. I like to get students to have confidence to do things on their own. And I think pasta is a great groundbreaker for that. So to start, because I do want to get these pastas going, I had given the on the list, there was 2 recipes, and again, these are not, you know, gospel recipes. They work for me. I've used them, these proportions. You'll see lots of other proportions out there. Again, if you Google egg pasta or pasta shapes, some use different types of flours. You can use all-purpose flour and it'll be perfectly fine. You can use bread flour and it'll be perfectly fine if that's what you have available. I like to make my pasta with a semolina flour, which is it's a harder winter wheat, and it's ground. Let's see if you can see that. It looks a little like a very soft polenta. It's not at all stores, so you'd have to buy it at a specialty store. But it feels like a very fine cornmeal, and it gives a nice tooth, a nice al dente flavor or texture to the pasta dough. That said, you don't need the specialty flours to make it. You can make it with all-purpose or bread flour. And I was telling Chris and Rob, I went and I bought, it's called Doppio Zero flour at Lunardi's today, because it's a very, very finely ground flour and gives a really nice, delicate texture to the noodle. But when I opened it, there were a bunch of mites on the inside, so I had to throw it out. So I have to make this with the semolina, which is great. It's going to show the technique perfectly fine. I'm going to demonstrate how to make the water-based pasta. It's the exact same technique as you would use for the egg-based pasta, except for you would be using an egg rather than water, but the technique is exactly the same. So I'm going to scan down so you don't see me. See if you can see that in the bowl. Yeah, you can see that. So I have the ratio here. I'm doing half of the recipe is about 75 grams. And if you watch the pasta grannies, you'll see them just throw stuff in a bowl and mix it. And this is the tricky part of trying to do this on a Zoom, because it really comes down to feeling and knowing what it is you're looking for and what it is it should look like and feel like while you're doing it. But I'll describe it as I'm doing it. And you can see there's only 2 ingredients in this. There's the flour. This is my semolina flour, and my water, and I don't want all of that. I only want 30, oh, I actually kind of do. 30 milliliters, so that's pretty good. And I'm gonna start by just stirring it in with a fork. And I like to do this by hand, because if you just throw this into a machine, a Cuisinart or something, the machine isn't gonna know whether it's right or not. But the more you do this, the more you're going to start to know whether it's too wet or too dry. What you're looking for is basically the feeling of like silly putty. I can tell right now that's already a little dry, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. But I'm just mixing it up. I get this out of the way because I'm going to pour it out onto the table. And this is the fun part. This is where the magic happens. Now that it's all come together, and this is something that doesn't happen in the machine. This kind of has to happen by itself. I'm going to start kneading the flour and the water together. And again, if I was doing this with the eggs, it would be the exact same thing, except for it would be the eggs are the liquid part rather than the water. Because eggs, the egg white, about 90% just water with some protein, some minerals. And you can see what I'm doing, I'll slow down to show you, is when you're kneading, I'm not putting a lot of muscle into it. All I'm doing is pulling it back and just sort of squishing it with my hand, with my body weight. By doing this, you're allowing the starch in the flour to absorb the liquid, and you're actually starting to create the strands of gluten from the wheat flour, which is going to give the texture and the feel, the mouth feel of the pasta. If somebody wants to learn how to make gluten-free pasta, it's a very different process because if you're not working with gluten, you've got to put something in there that's going to approximate the mouthfeel of the wheat gluten. So making rice noodles is very, very different from making this. You basically make a paste and then steam it in a wok. It's not difficult, but it's very different from this. This pasta does what it does because of the magic of gluten and starch. And then you just kind of rock back and forth like this. It takes 5 or 6 minutes. I'm not going to have you watch me do this the whole time, which is why I made one earlier, so it's ready to go. But you can see I'm just leaning into it and allowing it to move forward. If you were here, you would feel that it's not sticky. My fingers aren't sticking to it. It's not crumbly. You can stretch it and it doesn't rip. And that's what you're looking for with a pasta dough. And the more you get used to it, it's not my favorite thing to eat, but making hand rolled pasta is probably my favorite thing to do in the kitchen. I kick people out. I pour myself a glass of wine. I put on music, preferably with like a 3/4 time signature or something, because that really helps with the rhythm of leaning into the dough and kneading the dough. But I'm going to if I were actually going to be eating this right now, I would give it a little longer. But the main way you want to see if it's done is when you pinch it. If it doesn't snap back, it's getting nice and relaxed. It's not sticky. That wasn't exactly the proportion that I had written down, but that's what comes with the experience of kind of just making it. But either way, this is going to work into something that we can totally use. So I mentioned that let that rest. I made 2 doughs earlier. I made the egg pasta, which you can see is slightly more yellow because it's got the egg yolks in it. And I made the water-based pasta because they have to rest. Anytime you work a dough, whether it's for biscuits or bread or focaccia or whatever, it's a dance of creating gluten, letting gluten rest, creating gluten, letting gluten rest. And with the pasta, it's got to rest for about an hour or so. At room temperature is fine if you're going to use it within that hour. Otherwise, it's going to snap back. Anything you do with it is just going to be like working with a rubber band. But I think I will start with the egg dough. Move my out of the way. I'll do this by hand. When you're working with pasta, you always want to make sure you have a little bit of flour around and I probably should not have been wearing black. I'm realizing that now because I'm going to be covered in flour. That's okay. The good thing about the egg dough, the egg pasta is traditionally used to make noodles. So an egg pasta is more likely going to be used to make a fettuccine, a pappardelle, a linguine, any of this sort of square cut rectangular noodles. This is totally different from the dough that you would do if you were making a spaghetti or something. To do that, you need a special extruder, which forces the dough through different dies. So I can't today make spaghetti by hand. Actually, I think I do have one of those. I think it's at school. Different shapes like penne, like rigatoni, like spaghetti, which are round, have to go through a special machine. They're more modern shapes of pasta. But the more ancient forms of pasta are just basically sheets of pasta. And there's some controversy as to whether pasta comes from China or whether it comes from Central Asia or whether it comes from Italy. There's archaeological evidence, throwing my classics major information in there, that there was a type of pasta going back even to the Etruscans about 300-400 BC, which was probably just That's a question. I made sweet potato gnocchi once that was awful. Did I not wait long enough or didn't need it enough or what? Actually, if you're making a potato gnocchi, if it got thick and starchy, you probably overworked it. Because when you're making a gnocchi is very, very different. Making a gnocchi with potatoes should be mostly potatoes with just enough flour and egg yolks to hold it together. If you needed it, if you mixed it in a machine or whatever, that the potato starch starts to break up. And no, that's okay. I'm answering a question here. With gnocchi, it's a very different type of pasta because it's more potato based. And anytime you're working with potatoes, you want to work them as little as possible because the potato starch gets very gluey. Maybe the next one we'll do will be gnocchis, or I'll come to Albuquerque and show you how to do it. So with pasta, the egg dough is generally used to make like just sheets, whether you're going for lasagna. If you make 2 sheets and put stuff in between it, then you can cut out and make raviolis. It's used to make, like I mentioned, pappardelle and tagliatelle. Actually, at fettuccine and tagliatelle are the same thing. They're just different words for the same shape. Fettuccine is the word used in southern Italy. Tagliatelle is used in northern Italy, but it's a rectangle. It's a noodle that's kind of thin. So there's pastas that are noodles, like tagliatelle, pappardelle, all of that. And then there are just pasta shapes. And the shapes I'm going to show you are with the water based. You can use either to do both, but the nature of the noodles with the egg, which has the extra protein and the extra moisture, it just makes a better noodle than the watery, just the water and flour which makes better shapes. Which are free form shapes. And there's over 350 different Italian pasta shapes. We're going to do only a couple of them now. Wish we could do them all. So what I'm going to do, since I'm going to do it all by hand, is I've cut my egg pasta, which again you can see is yellow, and I'm just going to start rolling it out. I want to have a little bit of flour available, so in case it ever starts to stick, either to my rolling pin, boom, or my cutting board, I can put a little bit of flour down and it'll absorb and then not stick. If you're rolling it out and it starts to get a little bit too long, just cut it in half, like I'm going to do here. So if I was making ravioli, if I got this a little bit thinner, because this is still a little thick for ravioli, I could just put a little dollop of ricotta, put this on top, and then just use a cutter and cut it. That's how simple making ravioli is, by hand. My mother-in-law makes them every Christmas by hand, and they're fantastic. She doesn't even use the machine. She literally does it this way. And again, I'm only running out of breath because I'm completely COVID out of shape and I'm talking while I'm trying to do this. This shouldn't be a workout. You shouldn't be muscling this. If you're putting too much muscle or pressure into it, the dough needs to rest a little bit. And this is why I made this about 2 hours ago. You can see how when you stretch it, it doesn't really snap back too much. because the gluten is nice and relaxed. So I got that one going, and I'm going to do this one a little more. There we go. And the thickness depends on what you're making. If you can get it super, super thin, you've got a good dough. I think this might be about as thin as I want to make it. It should feel like kind of like soft leather. People always have really interesting descriptors for say it should feel like a baby's bottom, or it should feel like suede. And I'm like, I don't know what a baby's bottom feels like. I can't remember the last time I felt suede. So I don't know what those mean. But to me, it should feel like a thin kind of like leathery fabric. It shouldn't be sticky. It shouldn't be gooey. It shouldn't rip. It's got some nice resilience to it. And that's what I'm looking for when I want to make my shapes. So just for a simple pasta shape, I'm going to then roll it up, not pressing it together. And I'm going to shoot for sort of a fettuccine shape. So I'm going to cut there because that's the edge piece. I'm going to cut, maybe we'll cut them that thin. I'm not pressing down too much. I'm letting the knife do most of the work, because if you press down too much, then it risks kind of pushing them together. Then you just lift them up and toss them around. Put in a little bit of flour. You really can't use too much flour when you're doing this, because whatever extraneous flour is left on your noodles, it's going to come off in the water, and then it's going to make for a good sauce. Which you might actually probably put on the water. So there we go. That's fettuccine. You saw how easy that was even without a machine. Any questions? If you wanted to do, I think that's a nice amount for my dinner. So what I'm going to do is, if you're not going to use it right away, you want to kind of let it sit apart. You don't want it to sit on top of each other, or I set these up for a reason. If you're not going to use them for a couple hours, you can let your pasta hang. You can buy, at Williams Sonoma or Sur La Table, little racks that they can hang on. I've done it where I have, doing a dinner party for a dozen people or so, I have hangers hanging up all over my kitchen. And this just allows them to dry a little bit without sticking together and forming one big clump. Whoop. Feels very nice, which I know doesn't help since you can't feel it. I'm going to hang that up there. Got your pasta hanging. Where is it? There it is. Pasta hanging on a hanger. If you wanted to make more using the exact same pasta that's been sitting, let's say I want to make it, let's do something a little prettier. I've got this little crimper that you could use to make raviolis or something, but it also could be used to make, this is not working so well. More like forget the name of this, Matagliati, I think, which is a little thicker and has a nice kind of ribbons. It just holds on to the sauce. But I'm going to do, I wanted to show peppardelle but I had that sitting there. Exact same pasta could be used. Let's just fold it 3 times. Let's say I had like a really, really heavy, like meat ragu, and you could make more of a peppardelle, which is just the exact same dough that's cut into much thicker ribbons. And then the thicker ribbon is going to hold up to a really nice bolognese or a rabbit ragu or a like wild boar ragu. Goes really well with thicker pastas, go really well with nice heavier dishes. And if you were just going to be doing a lasagna, you just cut it into the shape and you just leave it as little water's boiling. Leave it as little strips, sheets that you would layer in your pasta. And if you have fresh pasta like this that you've made for lasagna, you don't need to cook it ahead of time. You just put it in your pasta, and there should be enough liquid in your tomato sauce or in your whatever sauce you're using to kind of cook it and set the dough. So that's the egg pasta. We have some egg pasta hanging there that I'll show you with the fettuccine sauce in a second. I want to get some other shapes going with our water pasta, which is a lot easier to work with. And this is the technique what you would use if you were making gnocchi, where it would be more of a almost like mashed potatoes with just enough flour to hold it together and just enough egg yolks to kind of give it some texture. But you want to roll it out into like a ribbon. I'm putting no muscle into this at all. And I'll show you 2 or 3 little, I have my, not that you need gadgets, but one of my colleagues went to Italy and bought me this. It's called a chitarra, which is a guitar that you put like the sheet of pasta down and then roll it over with the rolling pin, and it cuts it into your little, either your fettuccine shapes or your really, really small sort of angel hair shapes. It's a, it's fancy, it's not necessary, but it's a way to do it. If you ever see on like you go to Flour and Water and you see spaghetti alla chitarra, it was cut on one of those. So what I'm going to do with this is just the flour and water. I'm going to cut into very small, and you want to go smaller than you think, because once you drop this into water, they expand quite a bit. But most of the shapes you're going to do with a pasta like this, you just cut into basically little gnocchis. Like if you're making gnocchi, that's what you would have, except it would be made of potatoes. What I wanted to show you is little orecchiettes. Orecchiette means little ear. And what you do with an orecchiette is I'm going to give it a little bit of flour. Can you see that? Let's move that forward. Let's move this forward. My husband's taking a shower from work, so he's not able to be my cameraman at the moment. He's on his union break. So I'm going to hold down one side, and I'm just going to pull the other side like that. And it makes this little cap. You turn it inside out, and you get a little orecchiette. These people most often buy because they're easy to buy. I love making them because they're a lot more delicate when you make them yourself. But you hold one side and you kind of pull towards you with your finger. That needed a little more flour. So you've got kind of the out, and then you turn it inside out. And by turning it inside out, you create a little divot that holds the sauce. And then you create sort of a textured side that's going to hold the sauce on the other side. Pull like that, pull like this, flip it around, push it through with your finger. So it's super easy. And when you make them by hand, they don't look like they were made by a machine. So they're not all going to be perfect. They shouldn't all be perfect. Another form you can make with this from the exact same shape would be more like a little cavatelli. This is kind of a little pasta Dimpler. I'm sure there's a name, and I'm sure I know what it is, and I'm sure it's on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember it. All I'm going to do is put it on there, and when I twist it, you get the little, this would be like a cavatelli. So you've got the divot on the inside, you've got the ridges on the outside, and that holds on to your sauce. So put it on the divot, pull it towards you, and gives you those little, there we go. I'm missing the camera. This also can be used for gnocchis. If you've got the gnocchis and you want the little ridges. If you don't have one of these, you could just use your fork. Just put it on the divot. I mean, put the pasta on the tines and just pull it towards you, and you end up with kind of larger divots. See if I got a smaller fork. This might work. Little appetizer fork. So you don't need all of this equipment, but you get sort of the same idea. with the little cavatellis that you've made by hand. The really fun thing about making this, I did this, I don't generally like cooking for kids because it's a headache. But I've done a couple pasta parties for like teenagers' birthdays, and they love doing this because it entertains them, and then they've got something to do. We just roll it on the fork and you've got your little divots. So let me make a couple more orecchiettis just so I have some more of that to cook. But that's really how simple the pastas are. You just, there's so many different shapes to experiment with. I want to make sure there's time to cook these. Fortunately, they cook very, very quickly. But you're just pressing against the side and creating these little ears. So they look like little ears. That's what orecchiette means. Boom. That smells good going on the stove. Any questions on any of those? Obviously, it'd be more fun if we were all here to have you doing all this too. But it's,
I love how you're showing us, Tim, that we can do this just with like everyday like kitchen products, that we don't have to have a KitchenAid, we don't have to have a pasta cutter, we don't have to have, I mean, I just love that you're showing us that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's something that always has to be stressed when you're doing this. People are like, oh, I don't have that. It's like people were making pasta back before there was electricity. So it's a, it's not, it's again, another one of those things that's like, it's pointless to get fussy about, because it should be rustic. It should be rustic, and it should be, easy. So there, I have a decent plate. I'm going to separate the two. I'll make some orecchiettis with my tomato sauce, but I want to bring you over here. Swing you around to my stove. Where am I showing? What's that showing? That's not showing the stove. Oh, yeah, here, there we go. I need to move this all out of the way. Add some water. Yeah, perfect. Turn on the water. And when you're cooking pasta, the first dough I'm going to make, since we already have the tomato sauce cooked, you want a decent amount of salt in the water, particularly with the water-based pasta, the water and flour pasta. There wasn't any salt in that because those are generally made to dry out and to last longer, whereas the egg-based pasta tends to be made to be eaten right away. So there's a little bit of salt in there. If you had it in the dried pasta, it could get, I don't know, it could attract more water than you want to it. And even though it is a fresh pasta, it dries relatively well. So what I'm going to do, can you see both pots there? I don't think you need to actually watch the water boil. I'm going to show you how to make, there we go, our fettuccine sauce. And as I mentioned, the real Italian fettuccine Alfredo is basically the story about Alfredo sauce. It's the mythic story about Alfredo sauce, is that there was a cook in Rome in the early 20th century whose wife was pregnant and she was nauseous. And so he made her like the simplest pasta he could. He made her pasta tossed with butter with a little bit of cheese. And kind of the joke that Italians have about Americans who love Alfredo sauce is it's kind of like if we made toast with butter and like made it sound like it's this world-class food, because you can't get more pedestrian than just pasta with butter and cheese. But it's so delicate and it's so nice when it's done right that it's it's good to show, just to show as an alternative to the cream and the garlic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some butter and I'm going to let the butter melt while I cook my pasta. And this pasta, because it's so moist, is going to cook in like 2 minutes, very, very quickly. So I just want my butter to melt. And again, this isn't the exact proportions that is in the, I think in the recipe that I sent is for about 4 servings. I'm making a serving for 1. So that's about a tablespoon of butter, because I'm eating this. I don't want to eat all that much more. Oh, good. The demonstrations are on YouTube. Didn't Alfredo invent it? Well, that's the rumor, is that it was some Alfredo, Chef Alfredo in Rome. Same thing as Caesar salad, but that there's more historical evidence that it was a cook whose name was Cesar in Tijuana who came up with Italian Caesar salad that's now, and that's one of the fun things every semester. That's like one of the big aha moments when I'm teaching my food and culture class, when students are like, what? Caesar salad is Mexican? And I'm like, all right, that's my teaching for the day. So you see how quickly that pasta cooked? That was in there for 2 minutes or so. It's come to the top. It's floating. That's a good sign. I want this to kind of cook with the butter. So I'm just going to lift out all the pasta. And you see I'm deliberately getting a little bit of the water in there because I want it to still kind of cook. I'm going to put in a little pinch of salt. I'm going to put in a little pinch of pepper, not enough so that it becomes cacio e pepe, which is probably my favorite pasta, and a little bit of the water. And while that's cooking, I'm going to throw in my orecchiette, because these take a little bit longer to cook, not much. I need to get a little more water in there. And what I'm going to do is the pasta is going to finish cooking, so it picks up the flavor of the butter, it picks up the flavor of the salt and the pepper, and then you put it in and the cheese is going to melt. And this is how you can tell whether you have a good cheese or not. If that was like pre-shredded cheeses tend to have a starch on them. That would have clumped up and made one big ball. But I want to turn this down and let the water kind of evaporate off. So what you're left with is this beautiful sauce of cheese, of pasta, and of butter that's so much lighter, so much more flavorful. If you needed to put in garlic, you could put in garlic. But if you're eating a real Italian meal, there should be so much garlic in everything else. It's really nice to just have a nice little palate cleanser of a really nice Parmesan cheese. But that is how quickly that came together. And I thank God I'm going to stop cooking it because I know if I pushed it, it would break. But that came out kind of beautifully. You see how the cheese and the butter and the water all melted together? I don't think that even needs basil. Oh man, that smells so nice. Let me show you this. A little bit of cheese on top. That is a picture perfect fettuccine Alfredo. It's not soaking in a pool of cream. It's just light butter, light cheese. It smells so good. I'm not going to get you by eating it yourself.
So Tim, sorry, that was Parmesan cheese that you had grated yourself?
It was Parmesan cheese that I grated earlier, yes.
Okay.
With my trusty little microplaner from Stuart. Yeah, and it grates it up really, really nice and fine. I can see that, yeah. And this is, I buy the block of Parmesan rather than buy it pre-shredded because it just melts, particularly with this. It's so small and so fine, it just melts perfectly.
Awesome.
Nice. She busted out the KitchenAid. The KitchenAid is perfectly fine. If you've got a KitchenAid, that's a great thing to use. But I was hoping to show that it's also super easy to do, just even without a KitchenAid. So I need to grab another little pot. Here we go. And for my This again is the basic marinara. And I can't stress enough that a marinara sauce is a sauce that you should learn how to make one and make it to your own palate. Any marinara sauce recipe you find or you see anywhere is going to start with sweating aromatics, whether it's onion and garlic, shallot, whatever, but you lightly sweat some aromatics, add some good tomatoes. If you've got fresh tomatoes that you grew yourself, add those in. If you've got canned tomatoes, those are perfectly fine. Any Italian nonna is going to use canned tomatoes, particularly when they're not in season. And then make it to your own palate. Do you like the spicy pepperoncinos? Do you like it with basil? Do you like it with thyme? Do you like dried herbs or fresh herbs? Or maybe you have 4 or 5 different tomato sauces you use for different types of pasta. Like if I'm making a lasagna, I'm probably going to want a heavier tomato sauce than if I'm doing something like this, which should really just be nice and light as possible. So this is literally just, it's an onion, it's a little basil, it's some tomatoes. I will show you. I bought this. It's a really good brand that I like at Lunardi's, mainly because it's usually like $4.50. They're on sale for $1.80. So I bought like 8 of them to get through the next couple months. They're tomatoes from Italy. Not saying they're the best tomatoes in the world, but they're the tomatoes I use for this. So what you do, again, when your pasta's cooked and you see how big they got, they really, really expanded, is I want to finish them off actually in the sauce. So they should sit in the sauce for a couple minutes. I know some people like, a bowl of spaghetti with the sauce just sitting on top, but if you learn to sort of finish cooking your pastas in the sauce, it really picks up the flavors. And right now the pasta is absorbing, particularly with a fresh pasta, it's going to absorb some of that tomato sauce. It just sort of heightens the flavor. It makes it more flavorful for me. If you like it with just the raw pasta and then the sauce sitting on top, again, that's perfectly fine. You're cooking for you. I think those look great. So I'm going to lift them up, again, put them in the center of my bowl. I'll feed this to Adam. I'll eat the fettuccine myself. It's a nice little appetizer portion. Let me sprinkle a little cheese. And this will definitely get a basil leaf on top. I keep trying to grow basil here in Pacifica, and it keeps getting eaten by we have rodents that are pretty much gourmands at this point, eating all of my stuff. But that's how simple pasta making is. Let me make room here so you can actually see these plates. Got a lot of stuff in here. I'm sorry, I don't think I have time to break out the machine, but it's the same idea. Here we go. There we go. A nice Alfredo, butter and cheese with homemade noodles, nice Orecchiette marinara. And Orecchiette is a great pasta to learn how to do. It's super easy, as you saw. It's just the water and the flour. You make it, it lasts longer. So you can make, if you're doing a dinner on Saturday or something, you can make it on Wednesday or Thursday and keep it in the fridge. It'll be fine. But it's hard enough to handle a sauce with sausage and broccoli or broccoli rabe, some nice pepperoncino. It's a really good, it's probably the easiest of the handmade pastas to make without a machine. So I do it a lot. And like I said, it's fun for kids to do. So.
Tim, if you were to keep that and store it for a while, would you need to put any flour in there to not make it stick? Or
I would keep it in as close to a single layer on like a baking sheet as possible, sprinkled with a little bit of flour.
Okay.
The good thing about it is because there's no egg in it, it is literally just flour and water. You can let it sit out covered on room temperature, because if you put it in the refrigerator, if you have one of those refrigerators that's like really moist, it might pick up some water and stick together, but there's nothing in it that's going to go bad. So it could actually sit out at room temperature for 2 or 3 days because it's just flour and water, and then you're going to be boiling it anyway. So that's going to, take care of anything. So this is kind of torture. I'm smelling these. I really want to eat them. But that's our 2 sauces. Our 2 sauces, a couple different types.
You should dig in, Tim.
No, I can't talk with food in my mouth. I'm also looking at a bottle of wine. I'll do that when I say goodbye to everybody. But that's how simple pasta is. That's even with all that talking, I just got 4 different shapes done, 5 different shapes done. The sauces were made ahead of time, but the fettuccine, you saw how quickly that came together. It's very easy. And once, the American fettuccine has a place, but once you've tried it, as simple and as sort of elegant as this is, it's really, it's like totally different level. So
Tim, Lee had a question there in the chat.
Have I experimented with the plant-based meats? Yes. How to put it? I don't have anything against them. They're kind of interesting. I do a lot of vegetarian cooking myself. I'm actually teaching a class. I got a grant to teach a class next semester in plant-based cooking. As a chef, I'm more interested in making plant-based food that highlights all the interesting different beans that are out there and legumes and different stuff, like I'll show you. Like this brand, they do heirloom beans, these beautiful Royal Corona beans, or these huge lima beans and wild rices and different legumes and lentils. To me, as a chef who likes being creative, that's more interesting to make a vegetarian dish or a dish that doesn't just that isn't relying on meat, than using something that's trying to say it's meat. I've had the Impossible Burger. I think they're good. I've tried the Beyond Burger. I buy them. I eat them sometimes. But as a chef, I don't really like cooking with them, because it's like, then what are you doing? You're using that, and then you're, putting garnishes on it. That to me is an interesting cooking. So I like the dish we did back the tagine, the Moroccan tagine that relied on, it was purple sweet potatoes and orange sweet potatoes. So it had the Williams colors and chickpeas. And it was this beautiful stew that had no meat and wasn't pretending that it had meat or that it was meat. It was a vegetarian stew based on sweet potatoes and really good chickpeas. So, but that said, I did make a vegetarian just to try it with the ground Impossible Burger, the ground meat, a lasagna, to see how that came out. And what did I do? Last winter, I was really bored. I made a choucroute, which is it's like sausage and sauerkraut and apples. It's like an Alsatian stew that's usually made with wild game meats and sausages and sauerkraut. I did make that with the Impossible. I think those were the Beyond Burger sausages. Not a success. I ended up pulling out the Beyond Burger sausages and eating them on their own, but it just wasn't right. Being German myself, and that's kind of the one dish I remember my grandmother making and actually liking. It didn't do it for me, but I have nothing against them. But I think it's more interesting to be more creative with food that isn't trying to be something else, and is good on its own terms, rather than trying to approximate beef, which none of them do. I mean, they just don't. The weird thing is, I think the thing that comes closest to approximating the animal is you can buy them even at Safeway. They're like fish, fish and chips. It's like vegan fish. This like breaded and fried and stuff. It almost tastes more like fish than like a McDonald's fillet of fish. And I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they get the texture and the flakiness. But I eat that. I was like, wow, this really tastes like fish. I don't understand. But I love trying those things because it's, you know, they're interesting, and they're certainly going to be around for a while. I think they're much more than just a fad. So yeah.
You're fab. Tim, I have a question.
Yep.
We tried to make pasta for my 40-something birthday, had
Okay.
people over to make pasta. And then my plan was to put it in the little, what do they call, bird's nests, and freeze them so people could bring it home to freeze. And it worked until I tried to cook it afterwards, and it was a big clump of pasta. And so
yeah, if you're going to put it into a bird's nest, it's best to, like, I'll show it with this because I have some of this stuff. You really want to over flour it and make sure it's really, really over floured.
Oh.
Yeah, so like you toss it with the flour, and then if you froze that, there's enough of the starch. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Like I said, that's not getting absorbed. So when that freezes and then you want to drop it in frozen, you don't want to thaw it out, because that also could be when it's absorbing moisture and it's starting to not decompose. That sounds gross. It's starting to fall apart. So really, really make sure you over flour it and drop it in frozen. And it should be fine, because again, all of that starch that's on the outside of the noodle, that'll come off into your water.
Awesome. Yeah. You mentioned two things I didn't do, which is probably why I didn't.
Yeah, because it's again, a lot of freezers are very moist, which is odd since it's frozen, but that's where freezer burn comes from. But that's also why they say, you know, when you buy frozen vegetables, they're like, cook them frozen, because when you thaw them out, they kind of do what they do. So yeah. Is she enjoying doing it? Cool.
Yeah, she's doing better than I am, actually.
Nice. Awesome. Any other questions? What should we do for the next one? We'll talk about that later.
Thank you, Tim. You've been terrific as always.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you taking the time and your skills, and folks will actually be getting a survey. So if there are things down the road that you want Tim to do a demo, feel free to put that in the survey, or you can, my email's in the invitation. You can always send it to me as well. So thank you again, Tim.
No problem. It's always a lot of fun to do stuff for Williams and then get to eat it.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks, Tim. Wonderful presentation again. Like I said, I'm sort of low carb and more keto, so
I know. I was worried when you said that. I'm like, this is not the demo for keto.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
All.
Love you.
Love you too, Sarah. Bye, everybody.